Well, all right. We have our usual attendee, Angela student here, my favorite student. At least she always shows up. How are you doing? Anyhow, last week, we are on the unit regarding directional mics. And last week we talked about,
Unit 7.
In my holy book, Unit 7, directional mics. And what we did last week, we did the first half, and we really looked at signal-to-noise ratio. And we looked at the rounded traveling wave as opposed to the sharpened traveling wave due to outer hair cells and all that stuff. And we said why we need to increase signal-to-noise ratio. Therefore, and we showed only PowerPoint slides, not notes. And we went up to slide 27. Now, in English, what that means is, if I share here, what we did last week, we started out showing this slide here. Speech and noise plus hearing aids equals problems in noise. And to give you a real quick rundown, we talked about doing two things for hearing loss, improving audibility and improving signal-to-noise ratio. We talked about normal intact hair cells, as is shown here. We showed normal outer hair cells, as is shown here. Damaged hair cells, as is shown in this picture. And we said hearing aids don't grow new hair cells. Perfect hearing looks like this, and impaired hearing looks like this. Therefore, we must increase signal-to-noise ratio. So here's the two things the outer hair cells do. They sharpen and they amplify. In other words, the black areas right here. That's the action of the outer hair cells. When you are losing this action, you have a broadened, rounded traveling wave, and it's more difficult to distinguish between frequencies close together. That's why people with hearing loss have more problems picking out speech from background noise. That's why we need to increase the signal-to-noise ratio. Here's a traveling wave of two frequencies close together. Here's the same traveling wave in someone with damaged outer hair cells. And the bottom shows you a traveling wave with simple amplification of a hearing aid. You've made it bigger, but you can't restore the points. You can't restore the sharpening. Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall, we said last week. So hearing aids tend to make soft compromised sound into louder compromised sound. And we said there's two solutions for speech and noise. Presently, directional mics and digital noise reduction. And 2 weeks ago, we looked at digital noise reduction, and we said it subjectively makes you feel better, but we've got to objectively increase signal-to-noise ratio. So we said noise reduction, sure, implementation is fraught with flaws. Speech and noise are mixed together. I talked about our three little cousins, the weird little syllables. I said you can see these resonances here of the vocal tract with the syllables ba, da, and ga, and you can see there's hardly any difference, especially along the bottom ones. They're identical, and the top ones differ very, very little. And so basically, it's very difficult to pick out speech from noise because these little speech cues that tell you what the syllable was are easily buried in the noise. So here's speech in quiet. We've called these vowels the tall trees, and the voiced consonants, we call those the green evergreens along the mountain ranges, and the high frequency consonants are the soft sounds on the right. And when the seas flood things, you have got the valleys flooded. And it's very difficult to pull out the water without at the same time removing some of the trees, namely the speech. So we said the way digital noise reduction works is basically if sound is steady in intensity over time, the hearing aid thinks it's noise, and if the sound changes rapidly over time, the hearing aid thinks it's speech. So if the sound modulates very little over time, as in the top, the hearing aid reduces the gain in any channel in which this top sound is kind of picked out. And that's called digital noise reduction. And by what method? Amplitude modulation. We talked about these weird distributions of noise, noise having a steady, normal distribution like a fan or an air conditioner is almost always at one intensity, whereas speech is all over the place. Okay? Anyhow, we said the reason why the mean average of speech is not in the center of its range. We said digital hearing aids are using all this kind of stuff to tell whether it's noise or speech. They're using math. We don't. I'm a normal guy, I can't think like this kind of stuff, but digital algorithms do. They're using math to determine, hey, is it live or is it Memorex? Is it this or is it this? So they're looking at all these things together to determine whether to reduce the gain in any one particular channel or not. We said why you don't have digital hearing aids with one channel, because otherwise you're just reducing the gain for everything. Well, that's the same as reducing your volume control. That's why hearing aids have many channels today. So you're reducing the gain only in specific channels where the noise is sensed and none other. So old hat. Digital noise reduction does not at this time objectively, reliably, statistically improve speech understanding in noise, but it does improve subjective listening, comfort in noise, and that's important because if a person isn't comfortable in noise, the hearing aids will end up in the drawer and not in the ears where they belong. On the other hand, we said if you can bring a hearing aid up to a speaker's lips, you increase the signal-to-noise ratio. And this does improve speech reception in background noise. And we gave examples, directional mics, remote mics, FM systems, and then we talked a little bit about signal-to-noise ratio and made sure that we understood what these words mean. If the speech is louder than the noise, you got a plus 10. If it's 70 versus 60. If it's even Steven, you've got a 0 dB signal to noise ratio. And if you got 60 and 70 speech and 70 noise, you got a minus 10. Obviously, the top one's easy, the middle one is hard, and the bottom one's almost impossible. So we also showed this slide. When noise is 55, people tend to speak at about 61. That's a plus 6 SNR, easy. When noise is 65, however, speech also increases, but not as much. It's still louder, but it's only 3 dB signal-to-noise ratio. And when noise increases by another 10 dB, speech also increases, but now it's losing out. It's like one horse not running as fast as the other. They're both going in the same direction, but one horse is running faster. And the faster horse is the noise, and the speech isn't keeping up. So now you got a minus 1 dB. Or 0 dB, that's hard. So we said, basically, and now we're getting to where we ended last week. We said, for normal hearing people, speech and noise have to be of similar intensity to understand about half of the speech. In other words, if this is the situation, the bottom one, look at how similar they are. If you couldn't see my face, you probably would understand about 50% of what I said. That's normal hearing. Okay, but if you've got sensory neural loss, now you need an additional 5 dB. You need a plus 5 dB signal-to-noise ratio to understand 50% of what I said. Whereas the normal hearing person could get by with this situation, the sensory neural person is screwed in that situation. That's why you have directional mics that try to increase the signal-to-noise ratio by 5. That's the target. That's what they're trying to hit. Okay? So here we go. Signal-to-noise ratios for various degrees of hearing loss. If the Parent-Teachers Association pure tone average gets to be worse than 60, now directional mics won't work anymore. Because directional mics can only improve an SNR by a maximum of about 5 dB. They can't do any more. Now you need a remote mic. You need the loved one to be wearing a mic on his or her lapel, and the hearing impaired can have that communicate by Bluetooth to the hearing aids. That's a remote mic. And in that way, the speaker's voice is going into the mic and it's being delivered to the hearing aids. It's like taking your hearing aids and putting them near the lips of the speaker. You're increasing the signal-to-noise ratio. And as you keep getting worse hearing loss, you need a bigger SNR in order to understand what's going on. Okay? So, directional hearing aids. Look at this. What do you mean we're lost? I thought you bought a directional hearing aid. Well, directional hearing aids don't help you tell the direction of sound. Okay? Directional mics simply mean that the hearing aid is more sensitive to sound in one direction than it is to sounds from other directions. So now let's look at our notes on this stuff and see exactly where we are there. Okay, so if I go to escape here and go to our notes. Okay, let's read what it says here. Always remember there are two things that clinicians need to accomplish for clients. Increase audibility, increasing signal-to-noise ratio. And all of this stuff that I've written here, let's just read it together. Digital noise reduction cannot yet objectively improve speech recognition. It subjectively enhances listening comfort and noise. D-mics do improve signal-to-noise ratio, therefore they objectively improve listening and noise. There's nothing digital about D-mics, by the way. There ain't nothing digital about directional mics. Mics and receivers, hey Sam, how's it going? Good to see you. Mics and receivers have been around for years. I mean, all this digital about these, okay? All these things have been around, they're analog. There's nothing digital about a directional mic. Directional mics have been around for over 35 years. Before the late 1990s, directional mics on BTEs only. The BTE was usually only directional. On some BTEs, you could switch between directional and omnidirectional. In general, these older directional mics didn't work very well at increasing SNR. D mics had a renaissance, a rebirth. The year was 1998. Watch what happened here. Digital hearing aids came out in what year? 1997. The first one was Widex Senso. And look at this woman here, Bentler. She's a professor from University of Iowa. Guess what they did? They did an experiment with the two first digital hearing aids that came out. And they compared how they were with listening and noise to, let's see if I've got one here. Oh, I don't have one here, shoot. An ear trumpet, one of those old ear trumpets, okay, that are 100 years old. Which one did better for listening and noise? None. Statistically, no statistical difference between how the two new digital hearing aids did and an ear trumpet. Okay, so what I'm trying to tell you is that digital noise reduction does not increase understanding of speech and noise. It just makes you feel better. And feeling is important because if you don't feel good, you're not going to wear your hearing aids. They'll be in the drawer. You want them on the ear. So DNR has a very important role, but please never think that in percent it increases speech recognition, because it doesn't. That's why in 1998, Mead Killian, M-E-A-D, Killian, still alive, is in his 80s, lives in Chicago. He invented the insert headphones you're using. Okay, he also invented the K-amp that used till. Okay, so he resurrected directional mics, dragged them out of the trash where they'd been put, and reassembled them and put them on hearing aids. And all of a sudden, that year was 1998, the year after digital hearing aids came out. So when DNR did not deliver the promise as was originally hoped, directional mics came back. We're back. And they came, all of a sudden, all the hearing aid companies were doing this great backstroke, slapping D-mics on all their hearing aids. So let's read about D-mics and how they work. It's kind of interesting how they do work. So we are working our way down the page here. All right, where are we here? You read a bit of history here. Now, the purpose of D-mics is to improve SNR, to favor the pickup of sounds from the front compared to sounds from behind. And that assumes that the person you are facing is in front of you. Okay, so D-mics pick up sounds more like a tunnel. Okay, they're focusing their pickup in one direction. So if the speech and the noise both come from the front, then there's no benefit from a D-mic, is there? Okay, it's generally assumed that for most situations, speech and noise come from different directions. Never think of D mics as offering more sensitivity to frontal sounds, because that's not true. They simply are less sensitive to sounds from the sides and the rear. Okay, we'll show you that in a PowerPoint slide that's coming up. In the early 1990s, the Surgeon General of the USA, Food and Drug Administration, put a ban on false hearing aid advertisement, because people were talking about the hearing aids picking up, increasing listening and noise. He said, prove it. There's only one company that did, and that company was called Phonak. And they had a really good directional mic called Audio Zoom. And they did a study, and yep, their hearing aid did increase understanding in noise. But that was 1992. I mean, that was that was before digital even came out. See that? That's history. This paragraph here is talking about the renaissance of directional mics. And this paragraph here is talking about how they generally work. So let's look at that in moving slides in PowerPoint. So here we go. Directional mics, old versus new. Old mics, newer ones. But notice how they always have two doors. Look at this one. This one here, two doors. This one here is two Omni mics side by side. This is two doors again, two doors, okay? Two Omni mics side by side. Notice how I keep saying two, okay? Because that's how directional mics work. They have two doors. This is an omnidirectional mic, not directional. It's got one doorway, and sound enters the doorway and moves the diaphragm. A directional mic has two doorways. And here's the diaphragm. What does a mic do? It's a transducer. It's changing sound into electricity. So look at, in this doorway, there's a filter. So let's watch and see how D mics actually work. If you have sound coming from a direction and it hits a diaphragm, the diaphragm's going to go ticka, 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 ticka. But if, look at the right, if sound simultaneously hit the diaphragm from two opposite ends, you got cancellation. And that's how D mics work. Watch. In any mic, when sound moves a diaphragm, it goes and it changes the sound into electricity. When sounds hit the diaphragm at the same time from opposite directions, there is the sound of one hand clapping, silence. So let's look at a little schematic here. Here's sound coming from the front. Here's a directional mic. It's got a front door and a back door. And there's a time delay, because sound's going to hit the front door a split second before the rear door. So here we go. Sound's going to come in the front door, and it's going to wiggle the diaphragm and carry on. So let's look at a schematic of that. Now, I don't have many moving slides, so I'm going to milk the crap out of this, okay? So sound comes in, wiggles the diaphragm, and carries on. But now look at what happened when sounds come from the rear. There is a filter stuck in one door. Okay, so watch what happens here. Sound would come in and it slows down because of that filter. Meanwhile, sound carries on around, and when it enters the front door, there's cancellation, because by the time sound has gotten through here, sound is wrapped around and gotten through the front, and you got cancellation. So let's look at it here. Okay, and this is why, and this is how directional mics generally work. Here's just a PowerPoint slide or whatever of what I just showed you from the front and from behind. So if we go back over to here and look at this scene, okay, really realize that directional microphones, they're not more sensitive to sounds from the front. They're just less sensitive to sounds from the sides and the rear. Therefore, they pick up less from the sides and rear, and they pick up an equal amount as a regular mic would from the front. So make sure our emphasis is on the right syllable here. Because a lot of people, directional mics, they've been way more sensitive. No, they're just less sensitive to the sides. So we'll look at how that actually is plotted in what they call a polar plot. And it has nothing to do with the North Pole or Santa Claus. Okay? So let's go through our little slides here. Here's a polar plot. So here it is, directional mics. Now pretend I'm this round guy and I'm wearing the hearing aid on top of my head. Now people don't do that. They wear it on the side of their head. But at any rate, look at this. Here's sound coming from the blue is an omnidirectional mic. It's showing you that the microphone is equally sensitive to sounds in all directions. Think of the 0 as the guy's nose, the 270 and the 90 as the guy's ears, and the 180 as the back of his head. Okay? Now look at the red, black, and green. Those are 3 different D mics. Notice they are equally sensitive to sounds from the front. They're just less sensitive to sounds from the rear. And they often have this bubble in the back. So let's look at the front, the red one first. The red has a pickup pattern of a heart. Okay, it looks like an upside down heart. Okay, that's why it's called cardioid. Just like cardio as in heart. Okay, so look at its pickup pattern. It's got one null, N-U-L-L is the pinch point. Now, what do these numbers mean? Well, that's 30 decibels less sensitive to sounds straight from behind. Okay, it's equally sensitive to a regular mic to sounds from the front, but it's 30 decibels less sensitive to sounds coming straight from behind. But notice, the red isn't that far away from the edge all the time. Look at here, it's only a couple of dB. And now it's maybe 5. And see, here's 10, here's 20, and here's 30. So when you look at the difference between the blue and the red, watch my cursor. No difference, no difference, no difference. 1 or 2 dB, 1 or 2, maybe 3, now 5 dB, maybe about 5 dB here. Oh, getting to be about 10 dB here, getting to be 20 here, now 30, and now back to 20, and now back to 10, and now back to about 5, and now back to about 2.5, and now back to 1, and now 0. So if you add those differences, all 360 degrees, and then divide by 360, okay, how do you find a pure tone average? You add them up and divide by 3. How do you find the average difference in sensitivity? Well, you add up all the differences at each angle, 360 degrees, you add the differences up. You get a great big number, divide by 360, you get an average difference of around 5. Okay? And now look at the black. That's called a supercardioid. Look, it's less sensitive to sounds from the sides than the cardioid is, but it's a little bit more sensitive to sounds from behind than the cardioid is. And then you look at the green, the hypercardioid. It's even less sensitive to sounds from the sides, but it's a little bit more sensitive to sounds from behind. So basically, the differences between these 3 directional mics versus the omnidirectional mics to sounds coming from the sides and the rear, they all add up to about 5 dB less sensitive. So make sure you know how to read a polar plot, okay? The middle number is minus 30, but please don't think that the D mic is 30 dB less sensitive to sounds from all directions. No, that's just from that direction. And notice that the black and the green, they have 2 pinch points. Look at here, one pinch point here, another pinch point here. The pinch points are called nulls, N-U-L-L-S, nulls. So only at the null is there like a 30 decibel difference, isn't there? So, but sounds aren't coming straight from those null directions only. They're coming from all over the friggin' place. So basically, in a lab type situation where you had a microphone sitting on a turntable and you're measuring its directionality and you're picking up its polar plots, you might find what I showed you in that picture there. In reality, though, you're wearing a D mic on the side of 10 pounds of ugly fat, known as my head. Okay, so automatically the polar plots are all kind of ragged anyway now, because I'm not wearing the hearing aid here, I'm wearing it here. And then I'm wearing my other hearing aid over here. Okay, my head is just 10 pounds of ugly fat, as I said. So the polar plots that we showed you there are nice to be seen in a perfect lab situation. But in reality, and remember, there's something else, it's called the DI, the directional index. And that's the number 5 that I was telling you about. What's the average difference in sensitivity to sides and rear sounds of a D mic compared to a regular Omni mic, which is the blue? And usually the difference in sensitivity to sides and rear sounds of a D mic compared to an Omni mic is about 5 dB. So if you added up the differences for the red, you added up the differences for the black and for the green, and divided by 360, you'd end up with a number of about 5. That's called your directional index. So your DI, directional index, is a numerical quantification of your polar plots. Polar plots are showing you visibly. They're just giving you a picture. And the DI is the actual number, is the difference in sensitivity between a D mic's for side and rear sound compared to an Omni mic sensitivity for side and rear sounds. Okay, but remember now, I'm wearing the hearing aid on the side of my head. So the round polar plots that I just showed you in the picture ain't gonna happen. They're not as good. So do you know what? A D mic actually doesn't increase the signal to noise by 5 dB. And the directional index isn't as good as 5. It's usually about 2, maybe 3. Okay, so how much? So the directional index of a D mic in real life on my head, on a hearing aid, is going to be about 3. The difference in sensitivity of the D mic while I'm wearing it on as opposed to Omni mic, the difference in sensitivity to side and rear sounds is going to be about 3 dB. But that ain't bad, because every stinking dB that I can increase the signal to noise ratio can result in up to 10% speech improvement. So if I can, and even if we cut that number down from 10 to 5, even if we say every decibel that I can increase the signal to noise ratio increases my understanding of speech by 5 dB. Well, 2 times 5 is 10, that's 10%. 3 times 5 is 15%. If I can improve my understanding of speech by 15%, it's not too shabby, it's pretty good. You know, so this is the way to think about D mics. Polar plots show the picture of the sensitivity pattern. You might have cardioid, you might have supercardioid, you might have hypercardioid, whatever, and your manufacturers supply that to you. In fact, when you read the specs of their D mics, they'll show you the polar plots. You'll see what they offer. What is Phonak doing? What's Oticon doing? What's Resound? Oh, Oticon has left D mics, by the way. Oticon Open challenges D mics. Oticon Open. Are any of you two fitting the Open hearing aid at all? Have you seen that? OPN? The OPN hearing aid by Oticon defies, in fact, it farts in the general direction of directional mics. It hates them. It says, oh no, we have a totally different way of working with things. So that's Oticon, but all the other hearing aid companies are using D mics. And D mics increase signal to noise ratio in real life by about what their directional index is. So what's a directional index? The numerical quantification of the polar plot. So start at the beginning again. Polar plots give you a picture of the sensitivity pattern. And then when you want to apply a number to that, it's called the DI. And that's the average difference of a D mic versus a regular mic for sensitivity to side and rear directions of sound. And the DI predicts the signal to noise ratio improvement. So if a DI of 3 says, guess what, your SNR is going to be about 3 dB. And if 3 times 5% is 15%, you might have a 15% speech improvement. Not too shabby. Okay, let's share the screen and look at our notes again. Wouldn't that be pleasant? Okay, so let's go to the old notes here. That's what we covered. E-mics, how they work. So the picture that I showed you, the moving pictures in the PowerPoint, essentially are highlighting what's written at the bottom of that page. So there's no need for me to go into all of that. We've shown it already. So now we're moving on, top of page 2. Oh, looky. Polar plots, directional index. Now, don't worry about articulation index. Really couldn't care less. Okay, just leave that alone. Just think of our directional index. Polar plots show the sensitivity pattern of the mic, the amount of sound picked up in front versus the amount of sound picked up from other directions. Several different patterns are possible. There they're listed. Note how the dB is reduced by 30 at the center of each polar plot. You can tell I wrote this in Canada, can't you? Look at the word center in that sentence. C-E-N-T-R-E. That's the way Canadians spell center. In the US, it's E-R. But we always put a little U in things too, like color, C-O-L-O-U-R. Harbor, H-A-R-B-O-U-R. Neighbor, same thing. Canadians have that British, that wee bit of British to us, eh? Well, we've done legalized pot here in this country. You guys heard about that? Yeah, marijuana is legal. So I can talk about it. Of course, if it's going across the border into Trump country, I could get arrested, but I'm not there. So anyway, here we go. So directional mics reduced by about 30 at the center of the polar plot. This means the directional mic reduces sensitivity by 30 dB, but only at its nulls, not by 30 dB on average. The directional index quantifies the polar plots numerically. See how this is all written in kind of exactly what I was describing to you verbally in PowerPoint. So this is really the stuff that I need you to really make sure you know. Okay, this is the stuff we've talked about. And even here, before Sam Christensen joined us, but we were talking about this last week as well. Okay, for normal hearing to understand 50% of speech, the SNR needs to be about 0. For mild to moderate loss, however, now all of a sudden you've got to bump things up by about 5 dB. And that's what directional mics were trying to hit, was that target of increasing the SNR by about 5 dB, because most mild to moderate sensory neural loss, which is the most common hearing loss in the world, they need about a 5 dB signal to noise ratio improvement. But please realize, though, that directional mics can't really deliver 5 dB SNR. They can in a lab, but they can't in real life. So always remember the 10 pounds of ugly fat known as my head, okay? Therefore, the whole thing goes down to about 2 or 3 dB signal to noise ratio improvement. But even that ain't too shabby. So when we work down our way down the page, I said to you guys, don't worry about articulation index. You can read it if you want, but it's FNO, for nerds only, or freak not out, okay? Here we'll go to Killian, the inventor of the K-amp, the inventor of your insert headphones. Each single dB of speech improvement relative to noise can result in up to 10% improvement in speech intelligibility in background noise. Okay, so an improvement of about 4 dB can result in 40% speech improvement. Well, I think he exaggerated. I would say even if each dB results in 5%, and even if the directional mic only improves signal to noise ratio by 2 to 3, That's going to be a 10 to 15% improvement, and still that's better than digital noise reduction does. So they have their role. Now over here, see, the best results were shown in labs with Kemar. Kemar is that mannequin for acoustic research that we covered way back when we talked about ANSI testing at the beginning of your, at the very, very beginning of courses when you looked at OSPL 90 and all that. It's this mannequin that they, and all hearing aid companies have a Kemar. It's got the average sized torso, the average sized head of a person, and they measure and measure and measure hearing aids on Kemar. Knowles electronic mannequin for acoustic research. So basically, best results of directional mics are always shown on Kemar because it's in a lab. This is the part to put a star by. Real life improvement shows directional index of about 2 to 3 dB, not 5. And the directional index in a hearing aid manufacturer lab shows the predicted improvement with a directional mic. The actual increased SNR, of course, is the real result. So the directional index is what the prediction is, and they're saying we think it's going to increase the SNR by 2 to 3 dB, or 5 dB, or whatever the case in point. Okay, so know the difference between DI and signal-to-noise ratio. Directional index is what's predicted, and actual signal-to-noise ratio improvement is, of course, the result. So when you've got a directional index of 5, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a signal-to-noise ratio improvement of 5, because remember, you're not wearing the hearing aid in a lab. You're wearing it out in real life on the side of your head. Okay. We're doing just fine. It's 10 minutes after. Yeah, hey, Angela, what's up? Let me stop here. Hang on.
Let's confirm that for myself, because I know you lie a lot. Okay, directional index, DI, is our prediction.
It's a prediction from the polar plot saying, this is what we think the directional mic is going to do.
Okay.
And then, go ahead.
What is our result? The
result,
HA manufacturer labs?
Nope, the result is what happens in real life.
Real life.
In other words, so if a directional index says, yep, this is 5 dB, yep, this mic is going to improve the signal-to-noise ratio by 5 dB. In real life, it's actually going to be closer to 2 to 3 dB.
Okay.
Okay? Gotcha. Perfect. Oh, good. Glad you asked. Won't know unless you ask. Okay. All righty now. So here we go. This is the stuff we've talked about before. So you've seen this before. This was in your PowerPoints. So there's your signal to noise stuff. Okay. Same with this. Everything I'm highlighting here is we've seen this in our PowerPoint slides before. So this is just it in notes. In the PowerPoint slides, you had it before. If you want to know where, I'll show you right here. Go up a bit, it's easier. That would be this slide here and this slide here. Okay, we've seen this, so this is not new. So that's all this stuff is talking about in your notes. Now we get to the top of page 3. Yo.
It's me again. This is what I have on my notes. That. I don't have what you're showing, but I can look it up on PowerPoint.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, good enough. If you, I don't know why you don't have it in your notes, but okay, fair enough. It's on PowerPoint, so
yeah, anyway, I know where it's at.
Got it. Okay. Or we'll do the Department of Redundancy department. Okay, good stuff. Now, here we go. This is, now we're getting to what Angela was asking about. This is what she's got in her notes right there. Okay, so as your hearing loss gets worse, you need a greater and greater signal to noise ratio in order to understand 50% of what is said. Now, let me just give you some real life stuff here. You want to know how to test the directionality of a hearing aid? You can get into all things about running it on ANSI, and you know what I do? I have the client wear the hearing aid, if it's a directional mic, and I have them facing one direction, and I stand in front of the person and I'm talking to them, and I say, now keep your head in the same direction. I'm going to walk around you. And when I walk to the sides and I keep talking, and I walk around behind him and I keep talking, and I walk around and I say, did my voice get softer when I did that? He goes, yeah, good. Directional mic's working. Or you can listen to the hearing, like duh, or you can listen to the hearing aid through a listening tube. And you can talk at it like this and then turn the hearing aid away from you. Did your voice get softer? This is rocket science. You can check if a D mic is working. And that actually helps to make a sale. If you can demonstrate the benefit of the directional mic, and you're saying it's picking up sounds more in the direction that you're facing. So keep yourself facing in one direction and I'll walk around you while I keep talking. And that's kind of like a wow effect. Oh yeah, she's right. Huh, interesting, didn't know that. So anyway, just thought I'd mention it. So now we go to the notes, back to here. Recent developments in directionality. There's two here, okay? Automatic and adaptive. Automatic and adaptive. Automatic just means that the D mic turns on or off automatically, so the person doesn't have to switch. Because a lot of people don't know whether they forget, you know, they walk out, they can't remember to do all this stuff. It's like if the hearing aid is digital, why not have the hearing aid automatically use omnidirectional mic in quiet? And when you get out into noise, the hearing aid should automatically go into directional mic mode. Why not? Then the person doesn't have to think about it. The hearing aid's doing it automatically. And there's another one called adaptive directionality. And adaptive directionality means this. The polar plots change depending on the situation. The polar plots change. So if I show you a picture here of these polar plots, so I'll go to this here for a second so you can see it. The polar plots will change. And they don't even have to just be these three. It could be a polar plot looking like a figure 8. Maybe the guy's a taxi driver, and he wants to hear the guy behind him. He wants that. So he wants the mic to be sensitive in front and behind, not from the sides. Okay? So you can make these things. There's all this. When it's adaptive, it means that the polar plots change automatically, depending on the listening situation. So there's an awful lot of complexity going on. You see, what's digital about all this is this. Automatic and adaptive. That's the digital stuff. It's the algorithms in the hearing aid that tell the mic whether to go into directional mode or omnidirectional mode. And it's the digital algorithms inside the hearing aid that tell the mic, change into a cardioid direction, now become supercardioid, now become that figure 8, now become hypercardioid. So adaptive directionality enables automatic selection among various polar plots. Automatic directionality means the hearing aid turns on or off, the D mic turns on or off automatically. Switches between being omni mic and being directional mic, depending on the listening situation. Yes?
Okay, so the cardio, the
Yep.
super cardio, all those don't work at the same time.
No.
It's one or the
Correct.
other.
Correct.
Okay, and with the adaptive, that does it by itself.
Yeah, correctly. Yep.
It changes those. Okay, got
Yep.
that too then.
There you go. Yeah, it's not right. This is not meant to be. It's just meant to get the definitions down and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Good. All right. We are winding down in this particular unit as well. So now we are down to the middle of page 3 and we're looking at something called beamforming. What the Sam Hill is that? Well, here you go. That's just a super duper directional mic system. Now let's look at what a beamforming can look like. Let's just check this out. This is wild. Beamforming. Beamforming is sometimes, oh, here, by the way, automatic directionality, adaptive directionality. Okay, you got it in your PowerPoint slides too. Okay? Now, Resound had a weird directional mic system. Typical directional mics worn on each side of the head. Okay, here's binaural, omnidirectional. Okay, you're trying to listen to sounds coming from here's the guy listening. You got someone here, here, and here. He's got a left hearing aid, a right hearing aid on. Blue is is left, red is right. So omnidirectional, not very helpful. Here's the way the typical is. Guy's got directional mics on both ears. Resound did something really weird. Omnidirectional mic in one ear and directional mic in the other ear. They said that worked the best. Who knows? That was just there. They called it asymmetrical D-mic fitting. You might have heard of it, you might not have, but it exists. Anyway, here's beamforming. Now look at that, looks like a dang gun. And here's what it would look like on the side of your head. That's why most people aren't wearing these things, okay? But this directional mic has lots of ports. Not just two, okay? And it's really directional. I mean, directional index is about 7 to 10 dB, mo beta. But would you wear it? I don't think so. This is an example of a D mic. That was a fairly old example, but better than this one, okay? This you could set on the table. Notice, direction, omni, a bit directional, more directional, really directional. See the little dots where my cursor is moving? Mm-hmm. And the guy could wear a boot on the bottom of his or her hearing aids. This thing would communicate by Bluetooth with the boot. You could set this here on the table, and you could face the listener, you could face the person you wanted to. It kind of worked like a remote mic in a way. So beamforming, beamforming just means your microphone is super duper directional. Most people are using, what do you call it, remote mics. Basically, this being the last slide of your PowerPoint presentation is meant to just put a stamp on what we've talked about for the past 3 weeks. Digital noise reduction and directional microphones together make a very good team. Noise reduction gives subjective comfort. Directional mics is a cheap way to give objective improvement, and together they make a really good team. In our notes, you'll see beamforming described a little bit here. FM systems are like a super duper type of directional mic. I mean, they are really active they can increase signal to noise ratio by 20 dB. FM systems are phenomenal, but they cost a lot of money too. Most commonly, what you're going to see is remote mics sold as part of a package. When your clients are buying a Unitron or an Oticon or whatever, Phonak, whatever company it is, Starkey, most companies offer the hearing aids, and they also offer a television device that you can hook up to your TV, and it will send by Bluetooth to the person's hearing aids, and they almost always offer a remote mic.
That's a
lapel mic. And that is a good way of increasing signal to noise ratio, especially for the person whose hearing loss is more than mild to moderate. Always remember, D mics work well for mild to moderate loss. And that's the bulk of hearing loss. But never think D mics work for a severe loss, because they don't. When you get past 60, hearing loss, greater than 60 dB, now you're entering moderately severe territory. And when you get into severe hearing loss, they need more of a signal to noise improvement. Remember that slide I showed you? They need like 10. Okay, so a D mic isn't going to cut it. So they need a remote mic. Okay, and that's how I can end the story. we've basically covered D mics. If you look in your notes, there's not much to cover here. I'll show you what we've got left in our notes. Okay, you got directional mics revisited, or I could call digital noise reduction revisited, and we've covered that already. Okay, we've done that stuff. Been there, got the t-shirt. Okay, so there's no need. Okay, you can read it though over again. It's all good to read, but make sure that we understand the general main points of what we were discussing. It's better to think in broad strokes. So know what a polar plot is, know what a directional index is, know what the signal to noise ratios are, know that for normal hearing a 0 dB SNR means the situation is challenging. You can do it, but it's hard. How much will you get? About 50%. It's kind of tough. Know that when you got mild to moderate loss, you're going to need an additional 5 dB to do as well. And note that the best directional mics only can improve by 5 dB, and that's in a lab. And in a real situation, they're only going to improve by 2 to 3. And never believe Meade-Killian when he says each dB that you increase the SNR gives you 10%. Cut it in half. Each dB that might improve by 5. And still, a 10 to 15% improvement ain't too shabby after all. And with that, my fine feathered friends and those who aren't listening, and to Angela who's live do listening, live long and prosper like we always do. All right. Hey, all right. See you when we look at you. And we are nicely ahead of time. Your semesters at OTC are nice and long. Next week, we're going to look at a topic called ADRO, A-D-R-O, which is a totally weird way. It's a new hearing aid, and it's offered like crazy at Sam's Club, at HLT, Hearing Lab Technologies. Yep. ADRO. Angela, you look quizzical. I can't hear you. Is your mic off?
There we go.
Okay.
So we won't have notes over that. We'll just be learning, listening, and taking notes from you next Tuesday.
Yeah, I think, don't you have notes on that? I'll bet you do, but it's probably PowerPoint. You have a PowerPoint on it.
I have a PowerPoint. Okay, yeah, I got those.
You got it. That's all I'll show. There are no notes for it.
Okay, excellent. Okay. That's kind of exciting.
Big events in the lives of little people. Okay, we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much, Doctor.
Hey.